Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest episode of our entertainment show. As you know, each week and each month, each time this week, we air a special feature called Into the Vaults series, where we look back at timeless TV series or movies that have left their mark on the in terms of the generation, and it's dubbed what we call a cult classic in terms of they can be seen time and time again in terms of generations, that they have no sell by date. They can be picked up at any time and in terms of be watched again and again, whether it's horror, whether it's romance, whether it's a western, whether it's a detective show or a sci-fi show or a futuristic sort of thriller as well. In terms of, we look at all different types of series in terms of looking at the stars that have made that series, and in terms of jogging back their memories, and in terms of what made that series so special to them. And up for discussion today is a sci-fi series. It first aired in 2015. It originated in Toronto, Canada, and in total it had over 3 seasons in total, and very successful in terms of the first 2 seasons. In terms of the third sort of season, then in terms of it being switched over and not knowing what sort of network it would be on as well, sort of halted its progress. But it set many records in terms of its first season when it aired in this first episode, and the Syfy channel had 1.5 million viewers, and in space, the channel there in Canada as well, it topped the charts in terms of its records for a first appearance of show. Highly successful show throughout the first season, a very revered and renowned first season as well. The second season as well, a steady sort of progress as well, and then the third season, obviously that bit of indecisive of where it was going to end up obviously affected its show. But we're going to look now at some of the high points, and this TV series we're talking about today is called Dark Matter. In terms of, it deals with a futuristic sort of wanted villains who forget their memories. Their memories are sort of erased. It stars Marc Bendavid, Melissa O'Neill, Alex Mallari Jr., Zoie Palmer, Jodelle Ferland, Roger Cross, and our special guest this evening, the one and only Tree, or the character Marcus Boone, as he's revered in terms of his outlaw sort of name. And he joins us, the actor who played that role, the one and only Anthony Lemke. And Anthony, Dark Matter, 3 highly successful seasons. First of all, welcome to the show. And
thank you.
Do you miss the show? Do you miss being on set of Dark Matter?
I do. Yeah, I it's not something that you can easily recreate. Let's put it that way. It was the character, the people, the crew. I've been in the industry for quite some time, and it's pretty much among the most special experiences that I've ever had. So loved it, and I miss it. Yeah.
And Anthony, it's very rare these days that sci-fi shows, I know being from Canada, you know the sci-fi classics in terms of Battlestar Galactica and Stargate,
sure,
who have had set the boundaries in terms of having 5 seasons, and maybe in the case of Stargate, they went for 8 or 9 seasons. That's very rare. Even to get a second season is for a sci-fi show is rare enough these days. You got sort of 3 seasons as such, so you obviously did something very, very right and sort of unique in terms of when you came out in 2015. And had you good sort of feeling being on set in the first season or so that, yeah, we're onto something good here, this could be a long ride in terms of a long roller coaster? Or do you ever really know?
I don't think you ever really know. Specifically because when you're on set in the first season, you don't know how it's going to land with the audience. So, you do your work, and you're trying to figure out what the character is and what the show is. And then in the end, as an actor, you're only a piece of it, right? I mean, you put together your part, then all the actors, they do their part that you don't necessarily see because you're not in those scenes. But then it disappears into post-production land, and so much happens between, the work on set and the release date. And so that's really where the alchemy happens in post-production, and they did a great job, and folks responded to the show. And we got pretty lucky. So I think, second season, definitely there was a bit of an expectation that, it had done well in the first season, and I think we knew a little more what we were making. And so, second season, I think we had an idea, but definitely not first.
Mm. And I suppose, Anthony, before we get on to your character as well, in terms of Marcus Boone, I just want to take you back to the early days in terms of the landing the role, landing the character as such. It was a normal talent agent process in terms of talent agent recommends you for the role, you go for the audition, you try out 1 or 2 callbacks, you land the sort of gig, or sometimes you find out there's unique sort of stories where people are on a plane halfway across the country and they get a phone call and they sort of jet back or something, or there are sort of producers or something down the street or a night out, and look beholds. Is there any sort of good story, or was it just a normal sort of gig for you?
There actually is a pretty fun little story. So I've always been a bit of an odd duck in terms of where I've lived in terms of the industry. You know, obviously LA is the number one spot for actors to live, even if you're Canadian, and then Toronto or Vancouver. And at the time that I was cast in Dark Matter, I was living a few hours outside of Toronto. So consequently, going in for auditions in the room was a little bit harder. So I had grown accustomed to doing self-tapes. Now that's nothing. I mean, everyone does that. That's what the industry does. But back then, it was something that, you know, folks who were out of town or who were in LA or whatever would do to get their gigs. So I did a self-tape and, you know, it disappeared off into the ether. And then they called me in for a callback. And I told my agent, I was like, no, I don't want to go in for the callback, because the character that, if you've read the actual comic book, character is very different than I am, that I ended up playing. And I said, I don't want to go in. I don't want anyone to have to say, oh, no, what I really want you to do is do that thing that the guy in the comic book does. Because in the end, then I would go in and you can't say, no, sorry, casting director, I'm not going to do it. So you would do it, but then you know that that's not the direction I wanted for the character. And it's not what I thought I could bring to the character. So I said, no, I'm going to make up some story about being really busy on set, this, that, and the other. And so I told my agent, tell him that story. So she did, and I put it on tape again. And then there was another one, like a, you know, producer session or something like this. And I was like, nope, still not going in. I really just want to show them what I can do and what my version of this character is. And if they don't cast me, it's okay. It's no big deal. They can cast someone else. And so I did it, you know, and I was, the entire time I was not working. I was in my house in Prince Edward County, in my bedroom, putting the darn thing down. And so when I, you know, the first time that I met the showrunner was when I was on set and I'd been cast. Well, that's the way that worked.
And Anthony, the character Marcus Boone, I watched a good few episodes now, and he struck me a cross between Johnny Cage of Mortal Kombat and Duke Nukem in terms of two sort of bad boys sort of thrust together, a sort of a know-it-all sort of a sort of sarcastic, sort of smart ass, but with a soft, gentle core in terms of underneath all that sort of bravado that he sort of puts on in terms of that sort of character as well. But his sort of reputation sort of defied the actual, dare I say, the man himself. He was almost like he was living off his reputation rather than what you saw in terms of he was revered for what he was supposed to have done, but you never see why he was technically revered for these sort of crimes, where you can see sort of brutalness and the ruthlessness of some of these other sort of characters that are on that sort of rasa in terms of their sheer brutalness. You never really see that sort of brutalness of Marcus Boone, dare I say.
Rarely, if ever. It's an interesting choice that Joe made, the showrunner of the show, and he, you know, when we wake up and we don't have our memories and we aren't who we are, I mean, that's sort of what the show plays with. How much of who you are today is an accumulation of your past experiences and actions. And can you ever be somebody different than you were yesterday? And I think the show concludes that you can, but that society may not want to let you. And of course, your actions in the past keep catching up with you. So I think what you end up seeing is, you know, there's a bit of it that's that's nature, that's in Marcus Boone or 3, but a lot of it isn't. And then when you get his backstory, you realize that he actually had a really good upbringing until his parents were all slaughtered, and he was raised, in the end, by the person who ended up killing his parents. So he has this duality, and he of everybody in the show, I think, actually has the strongest duality and is most pulled towards a past that he probably didn't. Well, he definitely didn't remember in the first couple seasons, and then it is revealed to him in the 3rd season. Yeah.
And I suppose in terms of Dark Matter, one thing that struck me was the strong, really, outside of the main cast, was the ability to get in really strong, renowned, recurring sort of characters. I mean, Tori Higginson and David Hewlett are Syfy legends
sure.
in terms of Canada. In terms of that, so to have them do numerous sort of guest appearances or sort of guest episodes, it really sort of give that show that real sort of credibility. David Hewlett is a genius of an actor.
He's so much fun to work with, without a doubt. So we kept having some really great ones, and I remember the lady from Run Lola Run showed up, and that was like one of my favorite movies in the 90s, and she showed up. I was like, what? I think Frankie Potente or something like this is her name. The name, wasn't as important as the actual movie.
Michael Bisping.
That's it. We did. We did. Yeah. So I was like, man, they did a good job going to get those folks, and they really brought, they brought what they could bring, and it brought the show to the next level.
And I suppose, Anthony, in terms of the sets, on terms of Dark Matter, was it all? I imagine it was all studio, sort of loft shot location, and an awful lot of green screen as well, in terms of the projections and the outwards of the sort of ship as well. But in terms of the in terms of the layout of the sort of set, in terms of that, in terms of the Raza, and in terms of sort of ship, off sort of set location, how was it sort of laid out? Was it just a bare sort of rooms, or did you? It was almost felt like there was built entire sort of inside of a sort of ship in terms of its sort of layout.
They built a really good chunk of the ship, actually, and there were our studio was split into 2 sort of sub studios, and everything that felt like the ship's deck, and the control room, that whole area, and the hallways, the bedrooms, that was all in one set. And then the other set was the mess hall and the infirmary, and then a sort of floating set that they would create things with. And then there was also one large standing set that it doubled as many things, but on the ship, it was this large cargo hold area where that large door was in season 1, and it repeats. So that was both inside and outside of the cargo area. It was a lot of things, and it was also on space stations they would doll that area up. So a good part of it actually wasn't green screen, and our exteriors were almost exclusively in and around the Hamilton area, almost exclusively. Yeah. So that's what that was.
And I suppose, Anthony, in terms of cliffhangers, to leave all the fans gasping for more, that sort of cliffhanger at the end of season 1, you were sort of playing it off in terms of, was it 1 or was it 3 in terms of that sort of culprit? And lo and behold, it was the person, the person who sort of least a sort of expect in terms of that. But that was almost like you were sort of coming off and you were thinking to yourself, where can they now start in season 2? But they almost did like a sort of a prison break sort of team. And was that sort of very enjoyable? I know you only did it for 2 episodes, but I felt maybe you could maybe stretch that out a bit more, not maybe another 1 or 2 episodes out of that prison team.
The prison break thing was fantastic. Yeah, it really was. That was one of those, again, that was a set that was on by the 2nd season, we actually had an entire second location for our sets. And so we would have, first season, we just had 1 studio. And then the 2nd season, we had an entire second studio, and they built a whole big set. for the prison. And so for sure we could have played in there a little longer. I did like the idea that every episode you were going somewhere else, and that was fun. Although it was also fun to be on that prison set because it was a cool and involved set. But it's also, it's also relatively expensive to shoot on a set like that because you've got all the extras, people who have to populate it, etc. So there's a question of budget as well. I'm sure that's probably part of it.
And Anthony, when you saw Marc Bendavid's character get sort of killed off, was there any bit of sort of concern in terms of where the writers and producers were sort of taking this in terms of your own character? Was there always that sort of fear? Was it a surprise to you, or was it on the cards that was going to sort of happen?
It was a surprise to us. We did not know that Marc's character would not be with us for the series. I think in all of these shows, 2015, they had already started with that whole, hey, we kill off a main character and the audience loves it and hates it, but they tune in. And so they'd already started with that whole thing. And so I think we were all aware that, that any one of us could fall down the mine shaft, and it was Marc. But I was not privy to those discussions or decisions. It's not, it's above an actor's pay grade. But yeah, we were all shocked for sure. I think, coming up to the end of the first season, because the reality is we didn't know as actors who had betrayed the crew. And by the end of the first season, we had become, pretty close. And if shooting the first season, we'd become pretty close with each other. And we were pretty aware that whoever it was who was going to betray, going to have betrayed, I suppose I should use the right verb tense, that relationship would change and they wouldn't be with us in season 2, whatever that meant. And that's exactly what happened to Roger's character, where he wasn't with us and he shot, very much on his own for a good chunk of season 2. And but fortunately he didn't fall down the mine shaft, so to speak, right? He's still with us. He still shot, still paid, still, made his salary and paid his mortgage and all those things that are also important as an actor. But from a Unity perspective, yeah, we saw him a lot less. Yeah.
And Anthony, in terms of being involved in a hit sort of TV show in the sort of second season as well, I speak to many actors and talk once they get involved in sort of series and TV shows, they tell me because of the commitment in terms of shooting, in terms of they can't really take on any other projects, and projects come their way and talent agents sort of maybe sort of scripts and they just can't really because of the commitments and stuff. Whereas was Dark Matter open to you at the time for pursuing any other alternatives or maybe guest appearances or guest episodes, or was it just too full on for you?
It's not that it was, when I was shooting it, forget about it. But it was only 13 episodes. So you still have maybe call it half a year where maybe just a little bit less than where you're technically available to do stuff. But I really didn't do much, mostly because, like I said, I didn't live in Toronto. So when I shot that, I was away from my family and I had 3 young kids at the time. And had I chosen to really pile on in the career at that time, which might have been smart from a career perspective, I suppose, but I would have missed those 3 years of my kid's life. And that's not a trade-off I was willing to do. So I did a couple of little things. When an offer came in, I'd take it. If it was a short, movie, this kind of thing. But in the end, I didn't do much outside of Dark Matter. And that really was a choice. It's a weird thing. You always have to balance that as an actor, that you're only ever as good as your next gig, not your last one. And when you're on a series, sometimes you can sort of disappear from the world a little bit, right? Because you're not taking the auditions, you're not going out and meeting people because you're just shooting. And then when I wasn't shooting, I was outside of town with my family doing other things in that community. So that, those are the perils, those are the decisions you make. Yeah.
And Anthony, finally, before we start I know I want to touch on 1 or 2 projects that is in the pipeline for you at the moment, but in terms of the third season, were you halfway through the start of third season when sounds and rumblings came out that you were sort of aware that, well, maybe it's going to be finishing up? Did the producers, directors sort of inform you in terms of maybe a few episodes to go, or were you very much in the dark shooting that very last episode?
We were more than in the dark. We had zero expectation that it was going to end. And we didn't have a strong expectation that it would continue any more so than, say, at the end of the second season. But we felt pretty solid. And I know that Joe, the showrunner, his idea was to do 5 seasons, and he had it all planned out. And our numbers were solid in season 2. And I would say the only thing that happened in season 3 from an onset perspective, shooting perspective, is that there were a couple episodes where I think all of us were like, there's just something off with these episodes, where they just didn't read the same, they didn't work the same. And as we were putting them together, I think we could all kind of go, well, I don't know what happened with these, just a couple right in the middle of the season. A little bit like a hockey team that has an off stretch, and you play a few bad games. You just, no matter what you do, you can't get it together, and it just doesn't work, and you lose a few games, and that's that, right? I mean, it's a bit of a fire in a bottle kind of thing, making a television show, and it starts with the script and the team and the whatever, and we could all kind of sense that there was something weird about those episodes, and
I remember one, Anthony, just cut across where you were sort of stuck in a loop, a time sort of loop.
That was fun. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Yeah, that one was before that. That one was, I think, about the 5th episode of the 3rd season, and that one was a lot of fun. We were not in some sort of weird place. I can't remember what those episodes were. However, this is how it relates to what your question was. So when the show aired, we looked, you're always looking at numbers, this, that, and the other, thinking, are we going to get another season? The numbers were pretty good, even in season 3, and then they sort of dipped, not surprisingly, on those episodes where we as a cast were like, I'm not sure that this is the same vibe as all the other episodes. And then it went back up again. But my understanding of how it actually happened was the cancellation was that, in the networks, there's always politics, and there's people who have, who are the champion of your show, and there's people who are champion of the other show, and they're all vying for which show is going to get picked up and who's going to get, the props for having a successful show. And the fact that we tripped on those couple episodes was actually important, because they were deliberating yes or no, season 4 or not. And that played into it. And I know there were other high level things as well that I won't bore you with, that I am aware of, but that really they just came down to politics between networks and the LA office and New York office, silly things like this that, in the end, you have no control over that stuff. But that little hiccup in the 3rd season actually provided enough legroom for the folks who wanted to move on from our show to gain an upper hand in deciding to cancel. In the larger context. So really interesting. Yeah, really interesting.
And I suppose, Anthony, just to bring you on, I know in terms of projects in the pipeline at the moment, you're busy out, and the Franklin Wee Dixon sort of series, the Hardy Boys, Jeff and Matt, Frank and Joe Hardy, I mean, in terms of a timeless sort of classics. I think over 200 sort of books in terms of that. You're playing a role in the Hardy Boys. Dare I say, is this good or bad?
I'm a dad, so I'm good. I'm their father. I'm Mr. Hardy, which is a really cool role to play. Growing up in the era that I did, where Hardy Boys was Fenton Hardy, you betcha. It was bigger. I don't know that the kids in my kids, I guess you can kind of see them in the background there. They don't know it. They don't know it from the novels, but definitely everyone in my generation and on up for sure knows it. The kids do know it because every once in a while they spin out another television series of it. But the novels themselves, there's different novelists and different series. But every once in a while you meet folks who be like, oh no, I read, I read that. I read Nancy Drew.
I read them when I was
yeah, of course. Young. Yeah, that's it. So a lot of fun to be able to land on that one. What's kind of neat about it is that it literally shot on the set of Dark Matter in the same studio. So I'd walk in and we'd be doing our stuff, and there on the wall is the, you know, the poster of Dark Matter and all the friends that, you know, that you made. And so that was kind of fun to step back into that studio. And, you know, it's the ghosts of shows past, and lots of shows have gone by in that studio since, but yeah, to be a series regular again in that studio. Yeah, it was a sort of touching wow. So that's the third season is coming out now, and you can watch for that on Disney Plus around the world. And that's, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's a cool show. They pulled it forward into a bit of a Stranger Things vibe. Like they pulled it forward into that, we'll call it the 80s without calling it the 80s. It's got that feel to it. And they've taken the characters and expanded the world. It doesn't follow any of the particular books. It follows its own,
Yeah,
but it
because I
keeps
was just thinking
the vibe.
the books in terms of what all the content in the books, you'd be talking 4.5 hours for one episode. So I was just sort of curious.
No, they have their own stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose, Anthony Lemke, finally, for the last 30 seconds, in terms of nostalgia, in terms of the Into the Vault, let's pretend we have an Irish viewer or listener that's listening to this interview for the first time, one of a younger generation, and exploring for a new sort of TV series, and they come across Dark Matter. Can you describe it for them in the space of 30 seconds, what's in store for them, or why they should sort of tune in and watch Dark Matter for the very first time?
Sure. It's a sci-fi show that has at its heart a family of misfits that have to learn to be a family, and also learn to be good people and what it means, because they of course had their memories wiped from the very beginning and they don't know who they are. And it's in, like, I would say it's in the vibe of a Star Wars kind of feeling, in the sense that it's a bit campy, and I've always loved that kind of sci-fi. It's just a bit campy. It doesn't take itself too seriously. There's lots of moments of levity in the show, even though it's not a comedy. It's a straight up sci-fi soap opera, if you like, if you like a space opera, that kind of thing. And it's exactly the kind of sci-fi that I really liked. And I think you're going to fall in love with the characters, because the showrunner did a fantastic job of creating folks you just want to tune in and see from week to week.
On that note, not the number 6, not the number 5, not the number 4, not the number 2, not the number 1, but the number 3 sticking out, the one and only Marcus Boone himself, Anthony Lemke. Thanks for joining us this evening to share your memories of playing Marcus Boone in the sci-fi classic Dark Matter in our special Into the Vault series there this evening. Anthony Lemke, best luck, and
thank you.
Take care.
Take care. All the best, and thanks for having me on.